Welcome back, everybody. I'm the Fantasy Football Strategist, your NFL breaking news source, and the Dynasty and redraft implications behind said breaking news. In today's video, we're going to go over 5 players whose ADP is either too high, there are players at lower ADPs that present themselves as just about the same amount of upside, or potentially players at lower ADPs that have more upside. Please remember to like and subscribe. Let's get into the video. The first player on this list is Chris Olave, wide receiver of the New Orleans Saints. He's 24 years old, going into his third year. In his first year, he finished as the wide receiver 25. Then he finished as the wide receiver 16 this past year. So he is on an upward trajectory. However, he finished as a mid wide receiver 3 in his first year and as a low-end wide receiver 2 his second year. He's been the number one target in his offense, yet has really never been more than a low-end wide receiver 2. How are things really getting better for him? He didn't receive a quarterback upgrade, and the Saints at best can get out of their quarterback situation this next year, unless they really want to start Spencer Rattler in his rookie year, and I don't think he's NFL ready by any means. So, really, I just don't understand. He's being drafted as a high-end wide receiver 2, and I get it due to age partially, but his quarterback situation is still either Derek Carr or Spencer Rattler, and even as the number one option, he's never been anything more than a low-end wide receiver 2. And he's more of a consistent floor guy rather than a ceiling guy. It's really, he hasn't ever had a 30-point game in his career. So I'm really just not seeing the upside and really don't understand why he's being drafted this early. A player that I would much rather have in the exact same range is Drake London, wide receiver of the Atlanta Falcons. So he's 22 years old, going into his third year, so he's younger, despite being in the exact same draft class, by 2 years actually. He's going at pick 33 overall, the 309, and he's finished as a wide receiver 3 in his rookie year and just in the wide receiver 4 range this past year, but just like Chris Olave, he was in a terrible situation. But here's the reason why I project him to be a lot better this year and in the future. He not only received 1 QB upgrade, he received 2. They drafted Michael Penix, and they signed Kirk Cousins. So his situation is automatically way better from a QB position. And just like Chris Olave, he is the undisputed one in the offense, with a high target share, just like Chris Olave is going to have. Now, they also got rid of Arthur Smith. Awful just comes to mind when I talk about Arthur Smith. They brought in Raheem Morris and Zach Robinson, former passing game coordinator for the Los Angeles Rams. So he's not only getting a QB upgrade, he's getting 2, and he's also getting a scheme upgrade, while also being the undisputed one in his offense, just like Chris Olave. I would much rather have Drake London over Chris Olave, considering their ADPs are relatively the same, and somehow Drake London is going after him. And another player who's going at pick 37, or the 401 in his Dynasty startup, is Jalen Waddle. Now, this one makes absolutely no sense. I have no idea how Jalen Waddle is going below really either of these 2 receivers, to be honest with you. So he is the number 2 in his offense. Tyreek Hill is the 1, but Tyreek Hill is 30 years old. He's not going to be around forever. But more importantly, Jalen Waddle finished as the wide receiver 8 with Tyreek Hill in town 2 years ago. He dealt with a couple of injuries this year, which might be suppressing his ADP, but once again, he's only 25. He's going into year 4 at 25, so he's only 1 year older than Chris Olave. And despite being the number 2 on his team instead of the undisputed 1, he had a better fantasy finish 2 years ago. He's super explosive, and if he hadn't dealt with injuries, I imagine his ADP would be much higher than it is now. He's being drafted as the wide receiver 14 overall, so essentially a mid wide receiver 2. Every year until this past year, he's finished better than Chris Olave. His situation isn't any worse. It's really the same. And it just makes no sense to me. This guy is an explosive wide receiver in a fantastic scheme with a great head coach, and it makes absolutely no sense. I can't get behind it. I would absolutely take Jalen Waddle over Chris Olave at their current ADPs. And I don't mean this as a slight to Chris Olave. He's really talented. It's merely an ADP thing here. So the fourth player is Travis Kelce, tight end of the Kansas City Chiefs. I understand if you want to win now, he is the definition of win now. He's, however, 34, going to be 35 this year, going into his 12th season, and he's going at pick 52 overall or the 504 in a 12-team Dynasty startup. I really can't get behind this, especially considering who is available later than him. It would be one thing if he was still the only target in this Chiefs offense and he was going to be the undisputed number one. Now, he still might be the number one, but think about the target competition they just brought in. They still have Rashee Rice, even if he might get suspended a couple games. But what else did they do? They brought in Hollywood Brown. They drafted Xavier Worthy. There are so many more targets in this offense that there's no way that Travis Kelce is going to be repeating as a top 3 tight end. I don't think that's going to happen. And he's especially not going to be that much of an advantage anymore. There's only so many targets to go around, and every one of these players that I mentioned in this Chiefs offense is really talented. If anything, I would be much higher on Patrick Mahomes than any one of these individual targets this year. Plus, we had been seeing throughout the latter half of this past season a little bit of decline from Travis Kelce. Now, he did step it up in the playoffs, so I definitely don't think he's toast or anything. But in a Dynasty startup, you're drafting Travis Kelce over some of these players that I'm going to be mentioning. I really just can't get behind that. So, a player who is being drafted in a similar spot, but at pick 58 overall at the 5'10", is Mark Andrews, tight end of the Baltimore Ravens. Now, I get it. He's not as talented as Travis Kelce is. He is, however, 6 years younger than him. He is the undisputed number one in his offense. He's connected to Lamar Jackson. Zay Flowers is the only real credible receiving threat we have to worry about taking a massive target share of this offense. And he's not taking away targets from Mark Andrews. Him and Lamar have a special connection here. Travis Kelce is being drafted as a mid-tight end 1 at 6th overall among the tight end position, and Andrews is going 7th overall, a couple picks later than him. I would so much rather have Mark Andrews in Dynasty. Are you kidding me? I don't even know. I don't understand this in any way, shape, or form. Mark Andrews is an elite tight end 1. He's not coming into the year with an injury. He came back at the end of this past year, so we don't have to worry about that like we would with, say, TJ Hawkinson, for instance. But you're telling me in a Dynasty startup, people are taking Travis Kelce most of a full round ahead of Mark Andrews? Just sign me up for a lot more years of Mark Andrews over maybe a year or two of Travis Kelce in this scenario. Evan Ingram is the next similar player in terms of fantasy output that is maybe one of the best values in fantasy football because he's being drafted at pick 96. You heard me, 96 overall. That's the 8-12 in a Dynasty startup. He's 29, so 5 years younger than Travis Kelce, and he's also finished as the tight end 5-2 the past 2 years. How is he going this many rounds after Travis Kelce? Explain that to me. That makes no sense. His situation is barely different at all than it was the past 2 years. They brought in Brian Thomas to be a vertical receiver. He's not taking away targets from Evan Ingram. Evan Ingram is one of the most targeted tight ends we've seen in recent memory. He's shown no signs of decline. In fact, he's had 2 completely healthy years the last 2 years. I cannot possibly get behind taking Travis Kelce that far ahead of Evan Ingram. Just take Evan Ingram many rounds later. That makes no sense. He's the undisputed top tight end in his own room, and there's nobody that's going to be taking that many targets from him. They have Christian Kirk, who's a fine player. They have Brian Thomas, who's going to be a little bit more of a developmental player. Travis Etienne's going to be manning the running game, but that's not really going to affect him at all. Trevor Lawrence loves Evan Ingram, and so should you. Take him at where he's going over where Travis Kelce's going. The third player on this list is Devon Achane, running back of the Miami Dolphins. He's being drafted at pick 41 overall, or the 405 in a Dynasty startup. I get it. He has huge upside from week to week. He is, however, 5'9" and 188 pounds. He is absolutely tiny. What were the concerns that we had before he was drafted? That he's small, that he wouldn't be able to achieve a massive workload, and that he's probably not going to be able to stay healthy. Which of these three concerns did he alleviate? I'll give you a minute. The answer is none. He had a couple really high spike weeks, including a 50-point game. That's awesome. If you already have him on your team, then if you can get a massive price for him, then sell him. If not, you'd be definitely happy keeping him. But drafting him at pick 41 overall, he was hurt multiple times in his rookie year. He's not ever going to be able to sustain a large workload, and he couldn't even do that and stay healthy in his first season. He's a sell if I own him, and I don't own him. I don't own any shares of him. It's not that I would be opposed to it, but he's being drafted as the RB9 overall. I just cannot get behind that because he's just probably not going to be available for you from year to year. And especially in the latter half of the season when you need him the most, I just don't want to bet on having to have an RB that's under 190 pounds to lead my team. Add in the fact that they drafted Jalen Wright, who I understand is more of a Raheem Mostert replacement, but what it means is A-Chain's never going to have a larger role. If all three are healthy, his role probably diminishes somewhat. And then in the future, like I said, Jalen Wright's going to be the new Mostert. So what you saw is essentially what you're going to get. He's not going to get better than that. He is a screaming sell in my opinion. I don't understand being drafted as the RB9 overall in the 4th round. Don't sign me up for that. A player who I think presents tons of upside, maybe not more upside on a weekly basis, but still a ridiculous amount of upside, is Jonathan Brooks, running back for the Panthers. He was just drafted in the 2nd round, coming off an ACL tear. And while we might expect him to have kind of a slow start, this is a dynasty startup. He's a fantastic prospect going into a Dave Canales offense. We saw what Dave Canales did to Rachaad White, who is a terrible running back. He's a good receiver, but as far as running the ball, he's horrible. He had about 3.5 yards per carry this past year. Yuck. No thank you. Once again, he's going at pick 67 overall or the 607 in a dynasty startup. Multiple rounds, almost 3 rounds after A-Chain. Explain that to me. He's 6 foot, 216, so 29.7 BMI, right about the 30 threshold to be a bell cow back. And we know that Dave Canales used Rachaad White as a bell cow back, despite Rachaad White not being good. He finished as a top 5 RB because of this. Jonathan Brooks is actually good. I mean, I don't understand the disparity between their ADPs here. He's going to be a PPR machine, he's going to receive a massive workload, and he's going to get stronger as the season progresses, and then you'll have him for multiple years after that. And he's not tiny. I really can't get behind the disparity of their ADPs, and sign me up for Jonathan Brooks 2 whole rounds, almost 3 later. Another player who I don't understand how they're going this low is Trey Benson, running back for the Arizona Cardinals. Yes, he has James Conner in front of him. Should that be scaring anybody? No. James Conner has never played more than 13 games in his entire career. He's 29 years old. If there's anyone on this planet who is a guarantee for an injury, it's James Conner. So when, and yes, I said when, James Conner goes down, who's going to replace him? Is it going to be Michael Carter? No, it's going to be Trey Benson. And think about the offense they're going to have this year. They are not going to be able to stack the box against Trey Benson. They're going to have Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr. outside and in line. Then they're going to have Kyler Murray at quarterback. That is going to scare the living crap out of defenses. They're going to be a very high-scoring offense this year. And Trey Benson, at 6 foot 216, with a 4.39 40-yard dash and an insane 120-plus speed score, who also set a 10-year record for PFF's elusiveness rating in 2022. above the likes of Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, so on and so forth, is going at the 7-11, pick 83 overall. I'm telling you right now, this is going to be a Kenneth Walker situation where people weren't quite so sure about him, but he was insanely talented and a fantastic runner of the ball. The only difference is Trey Benson's a better receiver. Explain the disparity in ADP to me. Good luck with that. I'd much rather have Trey Benson way later, who's younger, and who's actually built to be a workhorse running back. The next player on this list is CJ Stroud. This one, out of all of the players I'm going to mention, is the most shocking, surprising, and nonsensical thing I've ever seen in my life. He's going at the 103, the third overall pick in a Dynasty startup. What? How are you going to be drafting somebody with essentially no rushing upside in any way, shape, or form at the 103? You realize for that to pay off, he's going to have to put up Patrick Mahomes' 2018 years every single year. He's going to have to put up that kind of efficiency to be worthy of this ADP. He provides almost no rushing. The floor for him is so much lower. In fact, he's going to have to be performing at such a higher level than everyone else around him to even come close to matching this ADP. I get it. He's really talented. He's a better real-life quarterback than in a fantasy football league. It's not even that I don't like him. It's just this ADP is absolutely atrocious. He has great weapons around him, and he could potentially have a couple years here and there where he finishes as a mid QB1, maybe. But he's going to have a 2018 Mahomes type of year to ever do that. I am completely, in every way, shape, and form, out at the 103. Someone who I would way, way, way rather have than CJ Stroud is Caleb Williams. Caleb Williams is going at pick 10 overall in a Dynasty startup, or the 110. 7 spots lower. He's going as QB7, whereas Stroud is going as the QB3. This is nonsensical. Caleb Williams in college has had 382 or more yards, including one of 400 yards, in 2 of his 3 collegiate seasons. He's also had 10 or more touchdowns in 2 of his 3 collegiate seasons. That's more than CJ Stroud has ever had. It's way more than he's ever had, as a matter of fact. So the rushing floor is definitely going to be there. Also, coming out, Caleb Williams is a much higher regarded prospect than CJ Stroud was this past year. He was going to be going number 1 overall since his freshman year. CJ Stroud didn't even go number 1 overall. So in terms of being a prospect, Caleb Williams is a much better prospect. He's being compared to Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers because of his mobility and pocket awareness and improvisational skills. He's also going into the best situation I've ever heard of for a number 1 overall quarterback. He's going to have Rome Odunze, DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, Cole Kmet, and DeAndre Swift, along with bookend tackles to protect him. CJ Stroud's also in a great situation, but the rushing floor and the situation just leads me to believe that there's no way Caleb Williams is going to be going this low this next year. In fact, mark my words and roast me if I'm somehow wrong, Caleb Williams will be going over CJ Stroud this next year in Dynasty startups. Mark my words and come back to roast me if I'm somehow wrong. I won't be. Get Caleb Williams, and in fact, if you have the 3rd overall pick, trade down for a huge plus to get a quarterback that's going to go ahead of him this next year. Think about the potential opportunities for your team if you were to take a trade like this. Help yourself out and get Caleb Williams over CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud is going to be hard-pressed to be anything more than a mid-QB1 in his best years, whereas Caleb Williams has the potential to be the number 1 overall quarterback any given year. Another quarterback who's going 17th off the board at the 205 is Jordan Love. Explain this to me. Yes, he's 25 years old, but that's not even remotely a concern. It was essentially his rookie year. and he finished as the QB5 overall. The QB5. How is he going at 17 and CJ Stroud is going at 3? Make that make sense to me. He obviously has the potential to be a top 5 quarterback. He just did it. He's in a Matt LaFleur offense, a Shanahan-style scheme that is conducive to fantasy success, as you can see by his top 5 finish. And his situation isn't getting worse anytime soon. In fact, considering Matt LaFleur as his head coach, there should be an insane amount of stability here. He has plenty of weapons around him. Luke Musgrave, Tucker Kraft, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson. They just signed Josh Jacobs. They're going to be scoring a ton of points this year and in the foreseeable future. They drafted Marshawn Lloyd, who's a talented running back who can catch the ball. If he cleans up his fumbling issues, he'll be good. Really, explain the 14-spot disparity here. You're getting him in the middle of the second round, and he finished higher than CJ Stroud did in essentially their same rookie years. He is a couple years older, but quarterback age doesn't really matter considering the good ones play until they're almost 40 or over 40. Just like with Caleb Williams, Jordan Love is going to be going way higher in Dynasty startups this next year. I don't know what it is about some Dynasty managers that just don't want to accept when somebody's good. It's kind of like Puka Nacua. If Puka Nacua was a first-round rookie wide receiver, no one would have ever been selling him for anything. You'd have to pay Justin Jefferson-type prices for him. Keep Jordan Love, draft him, and once again, if you have the 103, you probably don't want to go down all the way to the 205, but if you were to do that, you could get a massive haul for a quarterback who's reasonably likely to be going earlier than CJ Stroud once people realize that CJ Stroud is never ever going to be the third best QB in any given fantasy season. The final player on this list is tight end Sam Laporta. I do understand this because unlike CJ Stroud, Sam Laporta did finish as the tight end 1 overall. So it is a justifiable pick to pick him as the first tight end off the board. This isn't so much a gripe with his ADP of 25 or the 301 in a startup draft in Dynasty. It's more so just that there's players who I project to have similar, if not potentially better years in any given year than him going later than him. Really, a lot of the reason he was the tight end 1 is because he had 10 touchdowns this past year, which is great. But touchdown regression is a real thing, and while we can't project that necessarily, I definitely wouldn't bank on any tight end being a repeat offender of 10 or more touchdowns. Travis Kelce can't even do that every single year, so I really doubt Sam Laporta is going to be able to, especially considering he's not the top dog in his offense. That's ASRB. They're a run-heavy team with Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery in the fold. So really, I think it's kind of unsustainable for him to be as the tight end 1 every year, and he's more likely to be a top 5 tight end on a recurring basis, which is great. And once again, this isn't even a gripe about his ADP. It's more so just I think there's similar or potentially better options later on. And I think you could really be selling high on him because I doubt he's going to be the tight end 1 every year. A similar player that can be had at 40 overall or the 404 in a Dynasty startup is Trey McBride. He's going off as the tight end 2, and the difference between Sam Laporta and Trey McBride is negligible in my opinion. In fact, once Trey McBride was the tight end 1 in Arizona, over the second half of the year, if you look from weeks 8 on, he scored more points than Sam Laporta. I understand the Sam Laporta hype, and he deserves the hype he's gotten. It's just that once Trey McBride was allowed to be the tight end 1 on his own team, he scored more points than him. Yes, they brought in Marvin Harrison Jr., so that is going to limit his ceiling from week to week, but it's also going to mean that defenses can't just hyper-focus their attention to him. He was the only option in that offense, so he was receiving massive amounts of attention. It's going to make his life a million times easier. And he's still the second option in a Kyler Murray-led offense that's going to be quite potent. And he can be had 13 spots lower. That means that you can have a similar player a round later and get a different game-changing asset in the round in which you could take Sam Laporta. The best part is Trey McBride only had 3 touchdowns this past year, so he definitely has a lot of room to go up. Sam Laporta is probably not going to be scoring more than 10 touchdowns, even if you project more yards and a couple more catches. Really, Trey McBride is just so much better of a value. I would rather be getting a different game-changing asset in the 3rd round of your Dynasty startup. Another player that I would rather have at their ADP at least is Dalton Kincaid, tight end of the Buffalo Bills. He is the undisputed number 1 now with Stephon Diggs out of town. He is going 44th overall or the 408 in a Dynasty startup. That's over a round and a half later than Sam Laporta. He has a ton of room for more upside, and he's definitely going to have a better season than he had this past year. They drafted Keon Coleman to be their vertical X to replace Gabe Davis, which makes no sense because he's neither quick nor fast. It's a terrible scheme fit for him. If they're smart, they might eventually realize he needs to be a big slot. Although that's not our concern because that'll be good for Dalton Kincaid if they misuse him and don't allow him to thrive. So take advantage of that. Dalton Kincaid's going as the 3rd tight end off the board, and I would much rather draft him a round and a half later. The upside for him this year is monumental. It should shock no one if he were to be the tight end 1 overall with the massive target share he's going to be incurring here. Sign me up for a similar player with a better ADP in Dalton Kincaid. And once again, this isn't a disparagement of Sam Laporta. I love Sam Laporta. If all things were equal and I could get them at the exact same spot, I'd probably want a 50-50 ownership of the two. But I would much rather have him a round and a half later. So, to recap the list of players who I don't like at their ADP, or I think there's similar players a little bit later you can get, or players with potentially more upside way later that you can grab, we have Sam Laporta, CJ Stroud, Devon Achane, Travis Kelce, or Chris Olave. And once again, this is not meant to be a disparagement of their talents. They are all very talented assets who have real upside and are valuable. Once again, this is just me saying there are similar talents that can be had a little bit later or way later. But what do you think? Do you agree with my list? Disagree with my list? Do you think the options I provided are better, worse? Let me know in the comment section below. And let me know if you want me to cover anything in the future. Once again, I'm the Fantasy Football Strategist, your NFL breaking news source, and the Dynasty and Redraft implications behind said news. Please like and subscribe. It would mean the absolute world to me. And y'all have a fantastic day.